Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994.
In Durban, the women wore and wear gorgeous saris and peacock colours, silky diaphanous materials with gold and silver thread woven in, which drape gracefully over little satin tops in contrasting colours. A sapphire blue top is worn with a soft golden sari, scarlet with white, sea green with purple, and yellow with bright pink. A length of the same gossamer sari material, trimmed with sequins, hangs loosely over their heads, and they wear rubies and gold studs in their noses and ears. There's always a red dot in the middle of their foreheads between their eyes. We caught glimpses of these sparkling birds of paradise when we were small. I'm going back and digressing a little bit to my childhood. Walking on the pavement as Mum hurried us from the big multi-storey car park in Grey Street to Green Acres, the department store in West Street, on our twice-yearly visit to central Durban. This would have been fun, except we were on our way to where the dreaded dentist kept his rooms in a skyscraper overlooking the harbour. His waiting room had a huge picture window from where we could see the big cargo ships lying against the concrete docks, bow to stern in long lines, with tall cranes languidly lowering net-covered platforms of boxes into their holes. And way over to the right, almost on the other side of the harbour, gleaming, polished-looking white yachts rocked at their moorings in orderly clusters on the glassy turquoise waters of the yacht basin. I'd have loved to have leant my arms on the low windowsill and stare, entranced at the boats, but I could hear the high-pitched whine of the dentist's drill coming from through the wall of his surgery next to the waiting room, and I knew it would be my turn soon. Who's first, then? The receptionist smiled brightly at us all, Mum and her 4 little girls, all of us dressed in woolen kilts and Fairall pullovers, because it had been cold on the farm when we were woken at dawn by Evelina, our nanny. Tropical Durban is hot and steamy, even in midwinter, and we sweated into our scratchy clothes, itching and fidgeting. Me first, I'd say loudly. They all looked at me in amazement. Well, somebody's keen, the lady beamed at me. I didn't want to go in at all, but all the way down in the car during the 2-hour journey, while my nose had been pressed to the glass of the back window. I'd been dreading the dentist and spent the journey trying to work out some sort of strategy. I knew I couldn't escape the ordeal altogether, although when he asked any problems, the way he always did as I climbed onto the metal footrest to sit in his chair, the first shock was the cold vinyl on the back of my bare legs between the kilt and my fawn knee-length cotton woolen socks. The second shock was always the sight of that battery of sinister-looking silver apparatus that loomed overhead. The metal drills, the trays, the lights, and the tiny porcelain spit basin with its perpetually swirling runnel of pink-coloured water trickling around the bowl. I always smiled tightly at him and looked him in the eyes, all that I could see of his face above his white mask, his eyes and the bushy grey eyebrows above. Our dentist was ancient, and we'd all been going to him for years. Mum and Dad since the war. No, I always emphatically said, shaking my head vigorously, no problems, hoping he'd put down his tiny silver pick, undo the little bath plug chain that held the dribble bib under my chin and say, that's good, off you go then. But he never did. He always said, open wide and let's take a look. And then he started digging and poking with his twangy little wire hook. He actually makes holes, complained Diana bitterly after every visit we made. I can feel him making holes in my teeth so that he can drill them and put fillings in them. Today, my plan was to get in first and then be able to enjoy the harbour views while he was working on the others, instead of sitting, listening to the drilling and feeling sick with fear. These were the days before Novocaine injections and high-speed water drills. His drill was so slow it ground agonizing into the depths of my skull as I lay rigid with fear and pain, the back of my head sinking lower and lower, embedded in the headrest as he leaned into my molar, excavating a cavern. And so, unlike the Indians, we all ended up in scaled-down versions of Mum's tasteful pastel shirtwaisters in fawn, Mum's favourite colour for us, with pin tucks down the front and the buttons and narrow belts covered in the same material as the dress, while all our friends wore miniskirts or long orange and purple hippie cheesecloth dresses and bell-bottom trousers. We were not allowed long hair either. That was common as well. So every couple of months, she took us into Moy River for a job lot pudding basin haircut. Jewellery and makeup were a non-starter as well. God forbid pierced ears. Mum and Dad's favourite comment was common to describe a huge range of transgressions. People, their clothes, the way they speak, their houses, their behaviour, everything could be condemned under this label. It's a word spat out in disgust and an indictment on the quality of characters, incorporating poor taste, lack of breeding, shoddy upbringing, or immoral behaviour. Another version is vulgar or ordinary, as he's a very ordinary little man, and almost with a shudder, meaning he lacks breeding. Not out of the top drawer denotes common, as does not one of us, shortened to non-you. And finally, It's just not on. All these derogatory labels were applied simply if the culprit or victim wasn't what Mum or Dad personally approved of, and this left practically nobody who came up to scratch. I suspect that it smacked of vulgar behaviour to indulge oneself in buying more than one wedding dress. The best families in England have beautiful lace Edwardian or even Victorian wedding dresses, which are passed down like an heirloom from generation to generation. This one's fine, she said, nothing wrong with it, although Diana was allowed to choose her own headdress. The long lace-edged veil, which Nicolette had been allowed to choose for her wedding, had been carefully saved for the next daughter. But I think Diana had dug her heels in when it came to wearing a hand-me-down and rather squashed coronet of white silk flowers. Glittering coronets are only acceptable if it's a real diamond tiara, something else that has to be passed down from mother to daughter. And she had somehow persuaded Mum to pay for a new one. It looks so common, was the verdict, once it was too late to do anything about changing it. I don't know if I could have let her choose something so awful. She handed me the wedding dress. Put it on. I slipped out of my jeans and top and pulled the dress over my head. I was reed slim, so the fit was perfect widthways. But I'm a head taller than Nicolette and a good 8 inches taller than Diana. The dress was far too short. Come over here, barked Mum, who started briskly tugging at the dress to try and drag it down towards a better fit. But however hard she pulled or dragged, nothing would make it look anything other than short and decidedly skimpy. Oh, Jesus Christ, I don't bloody believe it. I'm going to have to get you a new dress for this blasted wedding, she said, wild-eyed with frustration. Take it off and give it back to me. I'll save it for Delia. I'll get that Afrikaner woman to make one up. This was the dressmaker who carefully sewed Mum's beautifully cut shirt-wasters. Mum had tried a couple of seamstresses in Maritzburg, but none had come up to scratch, and she'd finally settled on the little Afrikaner woman who'd been making simple but elegant dresses for her for years now. She bustled away to her sewing room next to the old nursery and rummaged around beneath the old electric singer on which she'd made all our much-hated Viella Liberty printed smock dresses when we were small. Out she crawled with a couple of dust-covered and dog-eared old 1950s pattern books, flipped briskly one to the bridal section, and looked at the pictures with some distaste. They all looked very common. She eventually tapped her finger on the one she found that, to her, was the least offensive. Perhaps this one with the high neck, but much plainer, definitely more simple. I'll take it to Mrs. Van when I go into Maritzburg next Thursday. Can I have a look? I reached out for the book, which Mum had tossed crossly onto a nearby table. No point. It's not going to look like that anyway, she said, sharply. The men will wear top hats and grey morning suits, of course, she continued. Can Fred wear a kilt? I asked tentatively. After all, he is Scottish, and Dad too. Whenever the subject comes up, he always says proudly, there's nothing other than pure Scottish blood in me. Certainly not, she said curtly. Why not? It'd look quite wrong, showing off. I was puzzled by this. At any opportunity, Mum and Dad compared New Forests favourably to Scotland and always looked pleased when visitors pointed out the similarities of some of our mountains to parts of the Scottish Highlands. I was also extremely disappointed, as Fred had told me he always wore his dress tartan in the evenings for dinner at Glencruiton. And since I wasn't going to be allowed to make any other decisions on my wedding, I'd have liked this small victory. It's hard to believe that one's mother would hijack one's wedding to the point, the way my mother did with all of us. It's just beggars belief. Fred and I drove back to Durban that night, and the next morning I walked over to the Natal newspaper's head office to put our announcement in the smalls. Mum had written out exactly how it was to be worded, and that was that. I'd followed my instructions and didn't give it another thought. 2 days later, Mum rang me at 6 in the morning. How could you? She was apoplectic. What? I'd been fast asleep, and by some sheer good fortune, and I can't remember why, I'd slept that night in my tiny, poky single room in the boarding house instead of in Fred's bed. She would have been even more than apoplectic if she'd known exactly what was going on behind her back. They've printed the announcements in the paper the wrong way round. What did you tell them? She demanded. Well, what you wrote down, I said defensively. Listen, they put the engagement is announced between Fiona, third daughter of etc., and Ferrier Mackay James, oldest son of. What's wrong? I ventured. It's the wrong way round, she exploded. Everybody knows the fiancé's name has to come first. I was silent while I tried to remember what I'd told the clerk at the newspaper's desk to write down. Was it my fault or theirs? It has to be them. I read out what was on your piece of paper exactly as you'd written it down, I said firmly. Anyway, does it matter? Matter? I could almost hear her foaming at the mouth with indignant rage. Of course it matters. What would people think? What'll our friends say? And the Mackay Jameses? They'll think we don't know any better. How could you be so dim-witted as not to check? I give up, I really do. It was too late. The deed had been done, but Mum rumbled away about it throughout the next 3 months, and I tried not to bring up the subject of newspapers if I could help it. Not so easy, and here I'm going to digress back to the 1950s for a moment about newspapers. Not so easy, as Dad was obsessed by them and always contrived to get one fetched or sent the 20-odd miles from Nottingham Road out to the farm every single day. He had a standing order with Hoosens to have both the Mercury and the Witness on standby at their counter. All his farm managers throughout the years had discovered, to their cost, not to forget the papers. Anybody who was coming out to the farm had to check at Hoosens before taking the dirt road turnoff, just in case. Back in the years after the war, right up until the mid-1970s, the postboy, a middle-aged Zulu, came out from the village every day, up to 12 dark greenish-brown canvas mailbags slung over his back, as he plodded along in the dust, on his shaggy post office issue, the Sutu pony. He rode to each farm on our section of the district road. delivering our padlocked bags, to which the farmers each held a key, handed them to our house servant, and collected the empty bags to take back to the tin-roofed post office in the village. For the best part of 30 years, Dad happily received the daily papers that way, until the post office discontinued their delivery service as the number of farmers gradually increased beyond a viable level. After that, we had to rent a private box in the post office and change our postal address to P.O. Box instead of the old private bag, although we'd been in the district for so long that any post simply addressed to New Forest, Nottingham Road sufficed. The Sunday papers had been an extra challenge to Dad, though, due to the new system, and as an experiment in the early 1950s, he had a neighbour who owned a two-seater plane. Dad instigated a system whereby he and a few other local farmers clubbed together to arrange that this pilot fly to Orreby Airport in Maritzburg, buy several bundles of the Sunday papers from the coffee shop where each subscribed for batch had been bound together individually with the selection of strong rubber bands cut from the inner tubes of old car tires. Then the pilot would fly low over the participating farms, hurling the rolls out of his window. It worked really well, Dad told us. We just had to remember to tell the nannies to bring the pram in, with whichever one of you girls was in it at the time, into the house beforehand. It was quite exciting watching the little plane zooming down the valley and circling just above the gum trees, while the pilot tried to aim our papers at the front lawn. Unfortunately, the papers usually fell onto our corrugated iron roof with a terrible bang, and after the third time they landed in the pigsty. So, since plastic bags hadn't arrived in this part of South Africa yet, he decided to give up and go back to his old method of inviting friends to come up and fish on Sundays, on the understanding that they called in at Hooson's for the papers first. That's it for now. I apologize for digressing a bit back to my childhood, trips to the dentist and describing the Indian saris and the way we got our papers, either from a pony or from the air. But that's enough for today. We'll continue with wedding plans next week. It's goodbye from me, and see you next week. And a happy Easter. It's Good Friday today. Bye-bye.
That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.